Normally the spleen is found on the left side of the cow. It's attached to the rumen, the first stomach. On very rare occasions, usually if there is a surgical problem, the spleen will displace. The link between the spleen and the rumen, that's where it's anchored, glued to, weakens or is destroyed. And as a result, the spleen then peels off the outer surface of the stomach, and it might find itself folded or being dragged away, peeled off, as we said, from the rumen, and it's found itself in a completely different place. That displacement, that splenoptosis, it disrupts the function of the spleen, and which is the function of the spleen. Really, it's all about storing blood. It's all about taking part in the immune system of the animal, and filtering of blood to a lesser extent. So with all that in mind, if the spleen is displaced, that will compromise the blood needs of the animal. When can we expect splenoptosis? As we found in this particular case, it's a side effect. It's a coincidental finding of displaced abomasum. Also in this case, twisted gut. A displaced abomasum is another fancy word for a twisted gut. Also in this case, there was traumatic reticulitis. So in other words, there was a wire affecting this cow. The cow had swollen a metal object, a very sharp metal object, which sits in the second stomach, not the rumen, the first, but the second stomach, the reticulum. And as the second stomach contracts, that metal object gets lodged and then perforates the wall of the second stomach and starts wandering inside the abdomen. And that wandering could be towards the diaphragm, towards the lungs, towards the liver. That then, the foreign body, as we can imagine, will cause all sorts of problems in the function of the animal as a whole. So in the case of splenoptosis that we described, the animal had already a couple of pre-existing conditions. The animal had traumatic reticulitis, or commonly called a wire. Also, because of the fact that the animal had calved recently, it had a displaced abomasum. So now that's the fourth stomach that usually lies on the right-hand side of the cow, complicated by the traumatic reticulitis and the disruption that caused in the abdomen. So we already have 2 or 3 different factors stacking up and causing us this disruption. How did all that lead to the displacement of the spleen? Well, as the peritonitis, as the infection of the abdomen began because of the wire, the abomasum displaced, and then it got lodged, it got glued against the spleen. We went to correct it. We went to correct the displaced abomasum, and as we were correcting it, we looked on the left-hand side of the cow. We found that the spleen was not in its normal place, which is the left-hand side attached to the rumen. That side of the rumen was completely blank, devoid of any normal anatomy. On further consideration, we found that the spleen had now dropped halfway down the left side of the cow, once the abomasum was corrected, it allowed us to put the spleen with a pair of forceps back to the correct place. So, what's the importance of endoscopy in all this? Well, the point about endoscopy is that without that minimally intrusive procedure, we wouldn't be able to have spotted it. The alternative to endoscopy is what we call laparotomy. So cut a rather large incision to the left side of the cow, big enough to put your hand through, and that would allow you to manipulate and examine the abdomen. The problem with that, it's far too big of an incision, and it's quite intrusive to the pathology, to whatever's been happening in the area. In my opinion, I think the incision as such would have interfered with the displacement of the spleen, and we may not even have seen it. But anyway, minimally intrusive approach like endoscopy allowed us to proceed with an exploration and a correction of the problem.